What if I told you that Rome was not destroyed by its enemies, but that it opened the gates to its own destruction? This is one of the most disturbing truths in the history of Rome, and that is exactly why so few dare to tell it the way it deserves to be told. The fall of Rome was not a moment of explosion, of epic battles, or of barbarian invaders tearing down walls with catapults. It was something far darker, far more silent, and far more similar to what happens to empires, companies, and civilizations today than anyone would like to admit. Roman civilization dominated the world for more than 1,000 years. Roman emperors commanded legions that marched from Britannia to Mesopotamia. The Roman Senate dictated laws that shaped the lives of 60 million people across 3 continents. Ancient Rome was, from every angle, indestructible. At least that was what everyone believed. But on the inside, far from the eyes of the people, something was rotting. Corruption was eroding institutions. The army was losing its identity. The economy was collapsing in slow motion. And when the final blow came, there was no one left willing to hold the empire on their shoulders. In this video, you will discover how the Roman Empire, the greatest machine of domination history has ever produced, was destroyed not by a single enemy, but by a sequence of mistakes, crises, and decisions that accumulated over centuries. You will understand what really happened in 476 AD, why the fall of Rome was more silent than any war, and what lesson this story carries for anyone who wants to understand how civilizations rise and how they disappear. And in the end, one truth will surprise you: Rome may have never truly died. If you've made it this far, you are not an ordinary viewer. You are part of a legion that refuses to let the history of Rome die. But most people who watch this channel are still not subscribed. If this story gave you something, you already know what to do. Click the red button below, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because the more this legion grows, the deeper we can go into the dark, forgotten stories that no one else dares to tell. Now lean back in your chair. Rome is about to speak. In 476 AD, something extraordinary happened at the heart of the Roman Empire, and the most disturbing part is that almost no one noticed. A boy of just 15 years old, named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Odoacer without battle, without blood, without the slightest sign of resistance. There were no cries in the streets of ancient Rome, no Roman legions marching in desperation, no flames consuming the Roman Senate. It was merely a cold, silent, almost bureaucratic act, as if someone simply turned off the lights in a room that had already been empty for a long time. What few scholars of Roman history tend to emphasize is that Odoacer, the man who closed the final chapter of the West, did not even want the title of Roman emperor. He proclaimed himself King of Italy and returned the imperial insignia to Constantinople, symbolically recognizing that the East was still the true Roma. This reveals something profound about Roman civilization. Even at the moment of Rome's fall, there was an awareness that the weight of that name was too great for just anyone to bear. The political structure had collapsed, but the symbol still breathed. The common population at the time barely felt the impact of that moment, and that says everything. The collapse of the Roman Empire was not a lightning strike on a sunny day. It was a storm that had been forming for decades, slowly, in the depths of a civilization that once ruled 3 continents and 60 million people. What the world saw in 476 AD was merely the final breath of something that had long been dying. But to understand why Rome reached that point, we must go back in time, to the moment when the empire not only existed, but dominated the world in a way history had never seen before. If there is a moment in Roman history that deserves to be studied under a microscope, it's the 2nd century AD, the period in which the Roman Empire functioned as a machine so finely tuned that it seemed impossible it could ever stop. Under the rule of emperors such as Marcus Aurelius, Rome controlled around 60 to 70 million people, spread across 3 continents in a way no other civilization had ever achieved before. It was not just territory, it was a web of power, culture, and organization that transformed conquered peoples into Romans without the need of chains. The strength of ancient Rome was never only in the Roman legions marching in perfect formation. It was in three pillars that sustained everything: an infrastructure of roads that connected the empire from end to end, allowing an army to reach any frontier in record time; a unified legal system which gave the Roman Senate and the provinces a common language of power; and Romanization, the process by which a man from Hispania or Syria could, through effort and loyalty, arise socially to the highest ranks of Roman civilization. This was not common in the ancient world, it was revolutionary. And it is precisely this capacity to integration that makes the peak of the Roman Empire so fascinating to study. Rome did not conquer lands, it conquered identities. A general born in Africa could command Roman legions. A philosopher from Greece could influence the thinking of the emperor himself. This model created centuries of stability and greatness. However, within the depths of that same strength, something was beginning to ferment silently, a tension between identities, between cultures, between ambitions. And when the right man was no longer on the throne, that tension erupted in a way no one was prepared to contain. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD is one of those moments in Roman history that historians look back on and think, this is where everything began to fall apart. Not because the empire collapsed at that exact moment, but because the man who took the throne after him was everything a Roman emperor should not be. Commodus, his son, ruled as if the Roman Empire were a stage, and he were the only actor that mattered. While Roman civilization needed strong leadership, he chose the sands of the Colosseum to display his strength in gladiatorial combat, as if the greatest power in Roman history could be managed between one fight and another. The problem with Commodus wasn't just his temperament, it was what his rule revealed about the fragility of Roman institutions. When a Roman emperor begins to govern in a personalistic and negligent way, the Roman Senate loses strength, the administration begins to collapse, and the army begins to realize it holds more power than it should. And that is exactly what happened. After the assassination of Commodus in 192 AD, a devastating civil war showed the world that the throne of the Roman Empire no longer belonged to political legitimacy. It belonged to whoever had more swords pointed in the right direction. The fall of Rome was beginning to take shape there, in the shadows of power. What Commodus's corruption planted in the heart of Roman civilization was something more dangerous than any external enemy: distrust in its own institutions. When the people stop believing the system works, when generals realize they can make and unmake Roman emperors at will, the state begins to erode from within, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Ancient Rome had already survived wars, plagues, and famines, but something was coming that would put every structure the empire had built to the test. A crisis so deep, so chaotic, and so devastating that it nearly erased the name of Rome from the map forever. Between 235 and 284 AD, the Roman Empire experienced what historians call the Crisis of the 3rd century, and the name does not do justice to the scale of the disaster. In less than 50 years, more than 50 Roman emperors rose to the throne. Most did not die of old age. Most were assassinated, deposed, or simply swept from power by another general with a larger Roman legion and a greater hunger for glory. The history of Rome, which until then had been built on pillars of order and continuity, fell into a cycle of political violence so intense that it seemed impossible for Roman civilization to survive to tell the tale. And it was not only the throne that trembled, it was everything. The economy of the Roman Empire collapsed. Coins were devalued so drastically that long-distance trade virtually came to a halt. Inflation destroyed the purchasing power of the provinces, and famine began to knock at the doors of regions that had once been symbols of ancient Rome's prosperity. To make matters worse, the empire nearly split in two. The Gallic Empire emerged in the west and the Palmyrene Kingdom in the east, each claiming the legacy of Roman civilization for itself. Rome was falling apart from within while still trying to hold its frontiers from the outside. The most symbolic blow, however, came in 260 AD, when the Roman Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur I, an event that shook the soul of the Roman Empire like nothing before. The idea that Rome was invincible, that the Roman legions would never bend before any enemy, vanished in that moment. And when a people loses belief in its own invincibility, something far deeper than territory begins to be lost. Rome was still standing, but it was no longer the same, and someone needed to emerge to try to save what remained, even if the price of that salvation was dividing the empire in two. When Diocletian came to power in 284 AD, the Roman Empire was a patient in critical condition, and he knew it. Instead of pretending everything was fine, he did something no Roman emperor before him had dared to do. He admitted that a single man could no longer govern that colossal machine alone. The solution was the Tetrarchy, the division of the empire into 4 parts, each with its own ruler, its own army, and its own administration. By the standards of ancient Rome, it was a radical idea, but it worked, at least for a time. Diocletian's reforms temporarily stabilized Roman civilization in an impressive way. The army was reorganized, the economy received new instruments of control, and the administration began to function again with a degree of coherence. But every solution carries within it the seeds of a new problem. By dividing the Roman Empire, Diocletian created something that could not be undone. 2 worlds within the same name. The East, rich, urban, and strategically defensible, began to evolve in one direction. The West, rural, vulnerable, and politically unstable, followed another. The fall of Rome in the West began to be written at that very moment. Constantine deepened this division by founding Constantinople in 330 AD, definitively shifting the center of gravity of Roman civilization to the east. The history of Rome began to move at 2 different rhythms, one that would flourish for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire, and another that was moving step by step toward the abyss. The Roman Senate in the West lost influence, the Roman legions weakened, and the frontiers began to show cracks that were increasingly difficult to ignore. And those cracks had a name. They came from within the very army that was supposed to protect Rome from everything and everyone. For centuries, the Roman legion was the most powerful symbol of Roman civilization, a disciplined force, loyal to the state, capable of turning any conquered territory into another chapter of Rome's history. But throughout the 4th century, something silent and devastating began to change that reality. The army of the Roman Empire, once composed of citizens who fought for an ideal, was progressively filled with mercenaries and foreign peoples, the so-called foederati, who fought not for ancient Rome, not for the Roman Senate, not for Roman civilization, but for land, payment, and loyalty to their own commanders. The names that came to dominate the military scene of the Roman Empire say everything. Stilicho, of Vandal origin, and Ricimer, half Visigoth, half Suebi, became the most powerful men in the West, more powerful than many Roman emperors by blood. This does not mean they were incompetent. On the contrary, they were brilliant strategists. The problem was structural. When a barbarian general holds more power than the Roman emperor he is supposed to serve, loyalty to the state ceases to exist. The Roman legion had ceased to be an instrument of Rome and had become an independent agent within it, and independent agents follow their own interests. What the transformation of the army ultimately revealed was a brutal truth about the fall of Rome. An empire cannot survive when the people responsible for defending it
do not identify with what they are defending. Roman civilization had been built on the idea of belonging. Anyone could become Roman. But when that sense of belonging disappeared from the ranks of the army itself, Rome was left exposed like never before. And it didn't take long for the outside world to recognize this weakness and decide to exploit it in a way that would leave an indelible mark on the history of Rome forever. If there is an image that captures the end of the Western Roman Empire, it's a row of dominoes falling, one pushing the next in a rhythm no one could stop. It all began with the Huns, a people of warriors from the Asian steppes, led by the feared Attila, whose arrival was so devastating that it pushed entire peoples into the borders of Roman civilization. The Visigoths, for example, didn't invade ancient Rome out of ambition. They entered the Roman Empire fleeing something even more terrifying. And it was precisely there that Roman mismanagement turned refugees into enemies. What followed was a cascade of disasters that Roman history had never experienced in such a short time. In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman legions suffered a catastrophic defeat, and the Roman Emperor Valens died on the battlefield, a symbolic and military blow at the same time. In 410 AD, Alaric and his Visigoths sacked Rome for the first time in 800 years, an event that shook the ancient world to its core. And in 439 AD, the Vandals seized Carthage, cutting off the main grain supply of the Roman Empire and condemning the West to a slow and inevitable famine. Each crisis fed the next at a pace that the Roman Senate and the Roman emperors simply could not keep up with. Famine generated instability, instability generated revolts, revolts weakened the army, and a weakened army opened the door to further invasions. The fall of Rome was not a moment, it was a process, a vicious and relentless cycle that fed itself with each passing year. And when that cycle finally reached its breaking point, what remained was that unsettling silence of 476 AD that we opened with at the beginning of this story. But did Rome truly die? The answer will surprise you far more than the fall itself.
Here is the truth that most history books do not present with the clarity it deserves. Rome did not die in 476 AD, it transformed. The Byzantine Empire, the direct heir of Roman civilization, survived for nearly 1,000 years after the silent deposition of Romulus Augustulus, preserving the language, law, and culture of ancient Rome with a level of sophistication few empires in history have managed to sustain. Justinian, one of the greatest Roman emperors of the East, not only preserved Roman law, but systematized it in such a powerful way that its principles still influence legal systems today, including that of Brazil. The Catholic Church assumed the role that the Roman Senate had left vacant, becoming the backbone of social organization in the West for centuries. Latin, the language of Roman legions and Roman emperors, did not disappear. It evolved, branched out, and transformed into Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Italian, languages now spoken by more than 1 billion people around the world. Architecture, legal systems, political organization, everything Roman civilization built remained present, quietly shaping the world that followed. Ancient Rome did not leave ruins, it left foundations. And even when Constantinople fell in 1453, closing the final chapter of the Roman Empire, Rome's legacy did not fade. On the contrary, it fueled the Renaissance, the movement that reignited the flame of Western civilization and laid the foundations of the modern world. Rome ceased to exist as an empire, but became something even greater, the foundation upon which all Western civilization was built. So the next time you use a legal code, speak Portuguese, or cross a bridge, remember there's a good chance Rome had something to do with it, and that may be the greatest achievement of any empire in the history of Rome. So, after everything you've just discovered, can you still look at the history of Rome the same way?
Because the truth is that the fall of Rome is not just a story of the past, it is a mirror. An empire that dominated the world for centuries was not brought down by invincible armies or supernatural forces. It was eroded from within, slowly, by corruption, by loss of identity, and by decisions that seemed right at the time but planted devastating seeds for the future. And if you pay attention, you will notice that this pattern repeats itself in empires, in companies, in entire civilizations. Now think about this. If the Roman emperors had learned from the mistakes of Commodus, would the crisis of the 3rd century have been avoided? If Rome had treated the Visigoths who entered its territory seeking refuge better, would the Battle of Adrianople have happened? And if Diocletian had divided the Roman Empire, would the West have survived longer? These questions do not have simple answers, and that is exactly why the history of Rome is so fascinating. Every decision, every mistake, every moment of weakness was one less brick in a wall that once seemed eternal. The greatest lesson Roman civilization leaves for those willing to see it is this: no structure, no matter how powerful, survives when the people meant to sustain it stop believing in it. Rome did not die when Romulus Augustulus was deposed. Rome died when the Romans stopped being Romans. And perhaps the most important question you can ask after this video is not about the past, but about the present. What are the structures in your life, in your society, that you are allowing to weaken without even realizing it? If this story made you think, challenged you, or surprised you in any way, leave a comment below sharing which moment of Rome's fall impacted you the most. Was it the silence of 476 AD? Was it the capture of Valerian? Was it Alaric's sack in 410? Tell me, because this conversation doesn't end here. And if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, this is the moment. Click the red button, turn on the bell, and fully join this legion, because the stories still to come are even darker, even deeper, and even more forgotten than this one. Rome still has many secrets to reveal.